So what's it like being in California at the minute, where especially where things are crazy, even in the context of the US? You know, I've seen so much in terms of the governor and some of the kind of some of the double standards that are going on, and some of the just I mean, even looking on from the UK, and into especially California, like we're just thinking about how weird it must be, and how worrying in some ways it must be from a church context to look just to see what all's going on. What's it like to just to be there in the middle of it all?
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, uh, your experience with this pandemic is really dependent in the states on what state you're in and what part of the state you're in. And I mean, it even down to your local police officers, your local sheriffs, what their attitude is toward the whole thing. So our county in Southern California is a little more conservative. It's a little
Mm-hmm.
less crazy. We're just east of LA. So in
Okay.
Los Angeles itself, it's crazy because I've gone in there to go to the airport and do some other stuff recently, and everything is completely locked down. That's
Wow.
where in the city of Los Angeles, that's where John MacArthur's just recently kind of
Yeah.
faced off against the governor by opening his church. So that feels like a whole. It feels like you're going into a different country. You're crossing the Iron Curtain or
Yeah,
something.
like a war zone.
Yeah, it does. It feels like you're going into some occupied territory. It's nuts. You
I
can't go
mean,
out to eat. You can't do anything. And over here, it's been a little looser. But I mean,
yeah.
even then, the toll it is taking on our mental health. Just to have uh, you have the governor lock everybody down and then say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, it's not so bad," and then kind of loosen the lockdown. And
Yeah.
then we went on
What's
a trip to Florida, and while we're there, back in California, they locked everything down again.
yeah,
So it's
it's crazy.
my wife is a hairstylist, and
Mm-hmm.
to be told all of a sudden, you run your own. You're a business owner. You run your own business. You buy your own stuff. You schedule your own clients, and all your income is gone. And then a
Mm-hmm.
few months later, no, you now you can open back up. And then like 2 weeks later, to say, oh no, you have to stop again. Like the governor obviously has no understanding of how hard it is to like start up a business,
Yeah.
schedule clients, buy things, things that expire, and then you have to throw them all away again and restart. They just think it's
Yeah.
this on-off switch that you can just turn on and off, and it's not like that. It's very clear that people in government, a lot of them have no experience in what
Mm.
it means to run a private business. So,
Well,
but
who's the governor trying to serve in all this? Who's he? If he's obviously, if it seems like he doesn't understand the working man and the business owner, then who is he? Is it all for optics, or what's going on with
I
that?
mean, it's a difference in philosophy, right? Because from a more progressive perspective, the government is responsible and policy is responsible to create as much safety as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so from the left's perspective, if you don't do anything, then you're responsible for anything that happens, as the governor, as the government. So it's just they just try to do something.
Yeah.
And we see that no matter what the crisis is, when we deal with gun violence, when we deal with gun violence here in the US, that's what the left is always saying is, the government has to do something. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, what? Like, what do you want them to do? What practical steps? And there's
Yeah.
very sometimes there aren't practical steps. Maybe there's not an easy answer, but for them, it's like we have to do something, or we're responsible for whatever happens. So that's
Mm.
what it feels like. Is they're just making arbitrary decisions to make it look like they're doing something, I guess.
Yeah. I was listening to your interview with Dan Crenshaw, and it was interesting to hear his perspective. And I heard him on Joe Rogan as well, talking a little bit about it. But just the thought of, I mean, there's a difference in perspective in terms of, should why do we need the government to tell people that they can't go into a restaurant instead of them feeling if they're comfortable to go
Right.
and take the risk they go, if they're not comfortable they don't go. And I mean, I understand, especially in the UK, there's a perspective of, you're doing it to protect the elderly and the vulnerable. um People here were advised to stay indoors if you were elderly or you had an underlying health condition that was fairly serious. You're advised to shield and stay indoors, and I'm not sure if that's something you've been doing, but at the same time, if I mean, elderly and vulnerable people, if they probably should be indoors and more cautious with their health. So maybe that's up to them to do that, but it's really hard, I think, um, just to live almost in fear of how it's going to affect the kind of lowest common denominator of society, rather than most people get a fairly mild, although it can be serious, obviously in a lot of cases, a fairly mild illness. Um, and if they're willing to take the risk, I guess, of doing that, maybe that's the way forward. But I'm kind of undecided on what's the best way to proceed with that. But it's interesting seeing how so many different states, so many different countries have handled the situation. But is it worrying for people, I guess, on the conservative side of politics and of opinion? Is it worrying how this will affect then how people see um the election in November? Is the handling of the coronavirus going to be a big deal, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's changed the whole game. I think going into February and March, the Democrats tried to successfully impeach President Trump, but were
Mm-hmm.
not able to remove him from office, and that failed ploy seemed to be the end for the Democrats. In terms of their race for the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but this just totally, threw a wrench in it, and you can debate how much of that is because the media wanted to push that narrative that this is a huge tragedy, a huge disaster. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are dying, and
Yeah.
this is a real pandemic. It's not a hoax or anything like that.
No.
But
No.
you do wonder how much. You think about something like car accidents. If you were to get a notification on your phone, the daily car accident total, how much that would
Yeah.
change your perspective on that. And I
And
don't
the
know.
same with the common flu.
Yeah, with the flu or any other, heart disease, any other cause of death,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't get that. And obviously, this is a very severe spike in deaths with the coronavirus causes, and it's a very serious issue right now. But we seem to be willing to take risks in other areas that we don't take with
Mm-hmm.
the coronavirus. It has become a category of its own, which is just really interesting. So yeah, I do think President Trump's handling of this is going to be reflected in the polls, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's all going to be good. I mean, the left is going crazy right now, which doesn't make them look good.
Yeah.
It seems like every time Trump opens his mouth, he gets into more trouble.
I know. Well, this is the frustration. I mean, people. My wife's from Florida, so people almost always the first time people meet her, they'll say something about, "Oh, what do you think of Donald Trump? What do you think of the president?" And I mean, both of us are kind of like on the fence about his whole presidency, is everything about him, because if for every great thing he does, he also like steps in a massive pile of cow dung, really, media wise. So it's kind of like, um, I mean, I don't know. It's so tough to make your mind up about him because you never know what's coming next. And I guess a really interesting example of this really was whenever he held the Bible up in front of the church in DC. And this is like, it's something that kind of tore apart communities in the Christian world, at least where I'm from, where some people are saying, "Oh, this is just appalling. We need to denounce him now. This is just a sign of someone using the Bible for their own gain." And then some people are like, "Well, good on him. He's standing up for what he believes in." So, I mean, what was the reaction where you are to that whole episode?
I mean, I think most Christians, at least most Christians that I know, were like kind of rolling their eyes over that whole thing. Like,
Yeah.
nobody stands in front of a church and like holds up a Bible. It was obviously a political stunt, a political ploy. Um, but at the same time, I've heard people that actually really appreciated it because, that church was attacked. That church was
Yeah.
burned, and it's a historic site of worship in Washington D.C. that presidents have visited for years. For I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, centuries. And so it was, to some people it was a symbol, that, like, you think of past presidents that would not have done that, would not
That's
have
true.
stood up for the Christian community. And so for some people it was like, yeah, I know he's not a Christian, right, but he's standing up for his
Mm.
voter base of Christians. So I think people that see things a little more pragmatically appreciate
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Do you think it's kind of common knowledge in a way that he isn't really a Christian, or I'm kind of undecided because I don't know. I never want to make that judgment, but it
Yeah,
kind of
well,
seems like it's the unspoken, thing that I guess he sort of is, but is he?
yeah, I mean, I think maybe he's culturally Christian, which is very common over here.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, he's, by his own admission, he said, "I don't ask for forgiveness. I just try to do things so that I don't have to ask for forgiveness."
Mm.
by his
Yeah.
own admission, he doesn't understand the Christian faith. But I mean, I think that is almost something to admire about him, is that he's a guy that's like, look, I'm not theologically on the same page as you
Mm-hmm.
Christians, but hey, I'll stand up for your right to worship freely.
Yeah, well, absolutely. From the viewpoint of it's better that he does that than if he doesn't, But it was
Sure.
interesting. I mean, I found it very interesting to see how people reacted to that episode, because in my mind I was wrestling with, um, is it right to kind of just say, well, you're not really a Christian, stop doing this, you're acting. Would you do that with any other person who professes to be a Christian, or would you attempt to be a bit more of a? I mean, not that Trump's reading our Facebook comments, but I found it interesting that so many public church figures came out and kind of were like, "You're nothing to do with us. We don't really want anything to do with you. Don't represent us. You're not part of the gang." I found it quite interesting actually how so many people shifted to that mood, and I understand calling out behavior that isn't Christian in your opinion, but also then, I mean, on a personal level, I kind of felt bad for. I wouldn't have wanted to be Trump professing to be a Christian, and then kind of everyone's like, nah, not really.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I never feel bad for criticizing politicians. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
uh, on the other hand, yeah, there's a knee-jerk reaction, right? Like people stumble over themselves. Christians, especially progressive Christians, will stumble over themselves to distance themselves from Trump.
Yeah,
But you look at past presidents who committed horrible atrocities and they never did that, or they
yeah.
proudly voted for them.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest thing with Trump is, yeah, he's kind of a bad dude. Yeah, he's done some bad stuff. Yeah,
Just
he's
like corn
obvious.
pop.
Yeah, he's a bad
He's a
dude. Like,
bad dude, and he ran a bunch of bad boys.
that's a pretty good accent, man.
that
But,
that
yeah,
that whole episode that made me laugh more than almost anything that he's said in his life.
yeah. But the thing is that I don't support Trump, necessarily 100%, but I don't think he's a departure for the presidency. Like that's the big difference between me and never Trumpers. Is never Trumpers will say like Trump is beyond the pale. He's
Mm-hmm.
a departure from the norm, and he's not. Like presidents have done horrible things for centuries, and we just
Yeah.
kind of tolerate it because they say nice things,
Yeah.
because
Well,
they speak good.
exactly. It's their actions versus their whole persona, and I guess Trump's persona is totally different. But
Right,
I
exactly.
mean,
So
de
yeah,
facto, is he any different? It could be argued that not really.
right.
Um, I mean, if he just if he just spoke like Ronald Reagan, then
Oh yeah, yeah,
some
they'd love him.
people would make
Yeah.
the argument, or that what's the difference?